What's going on, everyone? Thanks for checking into the Only Podcast. My name is Chris Vanini. I'm your host, as always, and I'm joined by the OnlyColors.com managing editor Joe Toohey. I'm a bit under the weather this week, so apologies if I sound a little weird or if I take multiple drinks of water during this. It's been a nauseating week. So, Joe. How are you doing on this? We're recording this Wednesday night. We've been getting hit with the slushy snow. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Just got out of Deadpool, actually, which was, I thought, a little overrated.
Okay, well,
it was all right.
I haven't seen it. All the before we get into that, a couple people mentioned last week that there seems to be a clicking sound on the audio on this podcast, and it may have been going on for a while. I don't hear that live. If it's my mic, I'm going to have Joe say he hasn't been hearing anything, but we're going to try to keep an ear out for that if we hear it. If it continues, I may try to get a new set of headphones with a new mic and see if that fixes it. So apologies. I did not realize that was going on. I don't re-listen to the entire podcast after recording it. I usually put it up right after we finish. But apologies for that. Thank you guys for listening. I hope it doesn't, if it continues, I hope it doesn't ruin the listening experience all that much for you guys. So Deadpool. When I saw the trailers, I was like, it seemed kind of childish commentary. The idea of just always the superhero swearing. And then I was surprised to see it was rated R, but I figured it was just for the swearing. And then everyone said it's the greatest movie ever. And I was like, oh, I didn't expect that. But I saw one or two people say it wasn't that good. And so you don't seem to think it was that good. Without spoiling anything, what did not live up to your expectations, I guess?
I don't know. I just didn't think it was as funny as everybody seemed to think that I had talked to about it. It's a fine action movie. I don't know, but people were all about it, and broke all these box office records, and I didn't get it.
Do you think your expectations were too high going in?
That's entirely possible, right? If I had seen it and had no idea, maybe it would have been a little bit more entertaining. But yeah, I expected to be really laughing a lot, and so maybe that was the problem. Yeah.
See, I came out of Star Wars Force Awakens not all that impressed, and I think part of it was because it was essentially a New Hope redux, but part of it was because everyone was saying this movie will remind you why you love Star Wars and it's the best one, and so my expectations were super high going into that. I came away that it didn't live up to that. I went and saw it a second time, and I enjoyed it more the second time. So maybe expectations have to play into that a little bit. Any update on?
I think that ties in nicely to maybe a later discussion about expectations for this Michigan State basketball team.
Yeah. Also, I thought the Deadpool character in the X-Men Origins Wolverine movie was good, even if that movie itself wasn't all that good. And the fact that it's the same guy, but I guess kind of a different story. I don't know. Not many people saw that movie. But we didn't talk about it last week. Any update on Blake O'Neal possibly becoming your roommate?
Yeah, the paperwork's in as of today, so it's certainly happening.
Wow.
That's pretty much the update. So I don't know when he moves in, but
this is huge news. This has to be you have to pull out the Only Colors breaking news banner. We never really did that. I think that's worthy of it, but is the Australian accent always seems kind of cool. Always makes people sound like more interesting, I guess.
Yeah.
So you said this was like a sublet?
Yeah, exactly. So if an Australian accent in an email is a thing, he definitely has it. It's
so you haven't actually talked to him yet?
It's gonna be an interesting time. That's for sure. Because I've got MSU flags up around all over the place.
I was gonna
and,
say,
like,
does he know
pillows
you're an MSU fan?
Well, so he came and checked out the place, so like he definitely has
Okay.
some knowledge of like just the fact that it's that I'm an MSU fan, but I think it'll work out okay. I used to live actually with a guy who was a GA and is now a full-time staffer for the football for U of M football as well, and we actually get along extremely well. Just he didn't, other than being a GA, he didn't go to U of M, so it's not particularly contentious. But yeah, so
I forget. Blake O'Neill, did he was a fifth-year transfer, right? So he's out of eligibility.
I think so.
I think he's just
Yeah, so he's out of
grad degree.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, because he came from Weber State or something like that, I think. Yeah, so we should get him on the podcast once you guys are good friends. So big news. So big news here at the only podcast. You heard it here first, unless you read it in a tweet before listening to this. But Blake O'Neill is about to be the roommate of the onlycolors.com managing editor, Joe Toohey. That seems like a pretty big deal.
Yeah, my friends are freaking out. So.
Were you? I forget. Were you at the game?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't remember. Yeah, I was there too. That was that. Yeah, not gonna see that again. So, all right. Well, I guess you'll just have to kind of keep us up weekly updates week to week on how that's going. You know, what kind of cereal he's eating and all that kind of stuff. You'll get all your Blake O'Neill news here on the Only Podcast every week. So.
Yeah, which is absolutely why Michigan State fans were tuning into the podcast to begin with, right? It was to get all of their former Michigan punter news.
Absolutely. So, before we move on to other stuff, make sure you're always checking out theonlycolors.com for a bunch of great stuff, especially as we get into tournament season. And make sure you're following Joe on Twitter at JOBIN, number 2 letter E, as well as at The Only Colors. And I'm on Twitter at Chris Vanini. So we're recording this Wednesday night. Villanova just lost to Xavier, meaning MSU could – they have. MSU is number 1 in KenPom I believe it could be for the first time ever. Because they did, he doesn't have the in-season ratings before 2011, and the only years that I think would have come into play would have been 2009 and 2010, and I think 2009 you had teams like North Carolina and Memphis that were probably up higher, and in Louisville the overall 1 seed that year. In 2010, MSU was kind of playing behind the 8 ball for a while there, and they finished the season at where did they finish 2010? Despite making the Final Four, they finished number 21 in KenPom that year. So this may be the first time that MSU has ever been number 1 in KenPom. They've been number 2 for the last couple of years at times, but number 1 coming off of Ohio State. And Joe, before we get into Ohio State and Wisconsin games, is this the best team in the country right now?
That's a really tough question. I would say maybe. I'm going to totally dodge this one because I think that there's just a number of very good teams, and I don't think, when you look at this MSU team in comparison to past MSU teams, it doesn't seem necessarily particularly standout in many ways, especially if you compare it to, say, like the 2013-14 team. So it feels weird, but they're definitely in the hunt, right? They're definitely in a group of teams that I think are true contenders for the national title this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make the case they're playing as well as anybody in the country right now. But as we've seen every once in a while, if Forbes isn't making his threes, it can make things difficult. So 2 games for MSU since we last podcasted. Two pretty handily, easily won games. Good wins. I don't remember what I predicted. We each predicted one would be close and the other would be a blowout. we flip-flopped on, we were vice versa on those. I don't remember who was what, but 12-point win over Wisconsin, kind of pulling away there in the second half. And same thing with Ohio State, 81-62 win. Kind of the last real tests, I think, up until later in the Big Ten tournament. So for a few weeks here now. Joe, I guess coming out of these last two games, what stuck out to you?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest thing was probably the play at power forward has been very encouraging, whether that was Deonta Davis against Nigel Hayes in the game against Wisconsin, where Mike Wilson, former TOC contributor and friend of ours, charted that Nigel Hayes actually did not hit a single shot while Deonta Davis was guarding him. He went 1 for 13 overall in that game last Thursday. And then in the Ohio State game, with Kenny Goins out, Marvin Clark really stepped up and I thought played quite well both defensively and offensively. He ended up with 3 personal fouls sort of in the middle of the second half, but he did start the second half, and I thought that he played very good defense. He had a couple threes, and I think that having an effective Marvin Clark was going to really raise the ceiling of this team, especially against teams like Ohio State, which have a number of forwards which have some length and some speed, and Deonta Davis can sometimes be not a great matchup in some of those instances. So the play at power forward I thought was particularly encouraging.
Yeah, that it kind of took, as the Ohio State game went on, I think, for Marvin Clark to finally get that comfort. Like when he started out last year, he'd catch the ball and be ready to shoot right off the bat. For a while, since he'd kind of gotten back into playing time, he wasn't even looking to shoot. I think he was focusing more on defense and trying to find out where he fit in everything. Then he gets that 3-pointer against Ohio State that kind of rolls in, and then from there he was pretty good. And he's going to be big because they don't have much. I mean, even with him, they don't have a lot of scoring inside. And when Matt Costello went out early with 2 fouls, it was abundantly clear Schilling doesn't have much of an offensive game. Deonta Davis really hasn't developed much of an offensive game in terms of back to the basket moves. So it came down to pretty much jump shooting for the rest of that half. But Clark being able to be the stretch 4 provides another look for this offense to kind of pull guys out a little bit. So yeah, that's a good spot. You know, every time we think the rotation is shortened up, it kind of is growing once again. Alvin Ellis is getting a little bit of time still. Marvin Clark's kind of pulling in there, and I think you're going to need those guys, especially if someone gets in foul trouble in a Big Ten tournament game or an NCAA tournament game. So Marvin Clark over the last 2 games was big, and I think Bryn Forbes continues to just absolutely light it up. He was scored 27 against Ohio State, going 7 for 10 from deep. But he also hit 2 mid-range shots. One was a floater, and I think one was a mid-range jumper. So he's not just sitting there shooting threes. He's not Max Hooper from Oakland, who doesn't take a single shot from 2. So that's good to see from him. And then Denzel Valentine, even on a game where he doesn't seem to play that well, he still finishes with 17 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds. So just a versatile team still, and kind of that extra games aren't much. So I don't know. What do you want to talk about right now about this team? It's not much to. We'll talk about Forbes in a minute, but what's up?
Yeah, let's talk about let's step back for a second and talk about expectations for this team, because I think that's sort of the biggest storyline right now for me, is that this team is, like we mentioned at the top, definitely in contention for a national title. I didn't think nobody really thought that they would necessarily be in that group this year. People thought, I think, that this team would be competitive in general, but maybe not a contender overall. So what's what would you at this point consider a successful season for this team? Do they kind of have to make the Final Four in order for it to be successful, or is this one of the, given the landscape of college basketball this season, would it be a disappointment if they didn't really make a run for the title? What do you think? Do you think what do you think constitutes success for this team at this point?
I think every MSU team is judged on whether or not they made the Final Four. Even in years when they're not expected to.
Right.
It's kind of like Red Wings teams. If they don't win the cup, a lot of the season, when you look back, kind of feels like a blur. I mean, MSU teams are remembered for when they make the Final Four. I think they have to minimum make the Final Four for this to be a successful season. I think if they don't reach the title game, a lot of people. It always depends. That's the thing. You look at the teams MSU's lost to in the Final Fours under Izzo. It was Duke in '99, Arizona in '01, North Carolina in '05, North Carolina in '09, Butler in 2010, and then Duke last year. I mean, you got a lot of Duke and North Carolinas in there, in teams that they didn't have as much talent as. I think this team has as much talent as anybody in the country, and I think minimum they have to make the Final Four. And it depends on how things shape out. But if this team doesn't play in the national championship game, I think you'll have some people that are disappointed. But again, it kind of depends on the matchups again. But I don't think this isn't a year where they're going to get out talented. I don't think in any game, although Iowa handed it to them, and Iowa's probably up there. But I don't. This isn't a year where MSU goes in and says, "Well, just hope they avoid that team," because they can beat anybody. They have as much talent as anybody. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and that sort of terrifies me. At the beginning of the season, I wrote sort of an opening post at The Only Colors about how this year was basically playing with house money because they made the Final Four unexpectedly last year. Tim Izzo has the best class, arguably the best class ever coming in next year. So this is sort of a transitional year where, if anything that happened outside of making the tournament, you always assume that they'll make the tournament, but anything above and beyond that would be gravy. So to me, even having a few weeks where they were number one in the country during the non-conference play was gravy in some sense, because you don't get to see your team be number one in the country for a long period of time in a lot of cases. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, I think that now at this point with a relatively healthy team, that it would be kind of silly not to expect a Final Four, given like you said, there are very few teams to be scared of, and even anybody that this team's going to encounter, they should be able to play with at this point. So but that's a little scary, because that means that there's a decent chance I will be disappointed at the end of this season. So
I always say the one thing MSU fans hate more than being disrespected is being completely respected, and that's everybody. We're already seeing everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people picking them as their championship team. Sorry, still sick.
Can we?
What's up?
So the next thing we should discuss is the Mark Titus Denzgazi.
Wait. We'll get to that for some reason. We'll get to that in a minute. But
sure.
Dick Vitale said he already has MSU penciled into the Final Four. Seth Davis says that they are he's their pick. I believe they're the Vegas best odds right now.
Yep.
So, I mean, that similar to the 2014 team that lost to UConn. MSU's picking things up at this time of year, and everybody's jumping on board. And, it makes sense, too. I think so. On this note, before we get into the other stuff,
Sure.
do you think they can get to a number one seed? Are they there, or are they? Do they need more to happen?
I think it's on the cusp. And I think what needs to happen is probably making the Big Ten tournament championship game. They probably don't need to win out. And the helpful thing is that the next few games are gimmies. The next 3 games, so they should get to 26-5, barring disaster in the regular season, and then they can win. There's a good chance they'll end up with a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. So then, if they can win 2 games at that point, to get to the winning 2 games at that point gets you to the Big Ten tournament championship. That's probably good enough, I would think. It might be, if they win out, I think that they're definitely in the top 4, but it would require a little bit of a run in the Big Ten tournament. And ultimately, in a field like this, it doesn't seem like there's a huge difference really between a 1 and a 2 seed, right? Because it's not like if by getting the 1 seed you get to avoid having a different 1 seed in your bracket. You're probably going to get if you're a 1 or a 2, the 2 or the 1, based on who you are, will be pretty good, but not a dominant team anyways. So yeah, there's a good chance, but I don't think it really matters that much.
Yeah, I mean, there's not one team you want to avoid, like Kentucky last year or something like that. Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, this year's been crazy. I mean, everybody's lost games. Xavier at 25-3, they have the fewest losses in the country. I mean, MSU has 5 losses, but Villanova has 4, Kansas has 4, and everybody else has 5, 6, 7. So it's not like there's 1 or 2 teams record-wise that stand out. And you saw that with how MSU jumped back into the top 10 and probably maybe into the top 5 soon in the polls. It depends on what happens elsewhere. Obviously, if they assuming they win out and reach the Big Ten title game and maybe lose to like a Purdue or Indiana or something, probably if they win the Big Ten, if they win their next, what would be 6 games now, I think they're good. So yeah, they're up to number 4 in the Big Ten standings now, and that's they can't get past unless they lose, and they finish with Rutgers and home against Penn State, at Rutgers, and home against Ohio State. So it's unlikely that they lose any of those games. So they should be good for the double bye in the Big Ten tournament this year.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping in the Big Ten tournament for another game against Iowa, because it just felt like both those games went as poorly as they could possibly go, and they're really the only other team that the only team in the Big Ten I'm scared of in any way, right?
Right. I mean, MSU's lost. They got blown out by Iowa twice, and they lost to Wisconsin by 1, lost to Nebraska by 1, lost to Purdue by 1. So, Iowa's the only team all season that has really gotten the better of them.
Right. And the other ones were coin tosses. Yeah.
In my opinion, of Iowa has changed in the last couple of weeks. With them losing to they seem to be wearing down a little bit.
And, which is interesting because they're a relatively deep team.
I don't know what it. I mean, their last few games, they lose to Penn State. They struggled against Minnesota, lose to Indiana. So the last 3 games here, they haven't looked all that good after looking quite dominant for a good stretch. I don't know what score they're getting. They got Wisconsin right now. I don't know what the score is, but they don't seem as confident of a team as they were. And I like MSU. I would like MSU's chances against them better than I would a couple weeks ago.
Actually, Iowa's down to Wisconsin at halftime right now, 35-34.
Yeah, so there you go. And that's a Wisconsin team that that they just struggled to beat Illinois. So, and obviously lost to MSU. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what's up with Iowa, but they're in a stretch here where they don't look like the same team they used to be. So I don't know if they're wearing down. I mean, Fran McCaffrey teams at this time of year have done that before. That's the thing. Second half of the season for them has typically not been all that great.
I mean, this would be if they somehow lost or didn't win the Big Ten outright at this point. It would be, to me, it'd be a little surprising. They would have required a pretty massive collapse, and they've kind of started it already.
Well, I mean, they need to win. Indiana's technically ahead at 12-3, and they're 11-3. So, and they do play each other again. So, the two of those teams play each other. So, it's unlikely MSU they could move up. MSU could move up to 2 or 3, but I don't think they're gonna be able to catch Iowa for the league title. And Matt made an interesting point on Twitter today regarding Valentine and National Player of the Year. Let's talk about this for a minute. Valentine with National Player of the Year. If he hits those those buzzer-beating shots against Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Purdue, MSU's sitting at 26-2, and Valentine looks like an incredibly clutch player and probably is the National Player of the Year. For a number of people, at least on TV, seem to just kind of dismiss Valentine's chances and keep saying if he hadn't gotten hurt, he'd be right in there. He only missed 4 games. It's not like he missed the whole non-conference slate or something like that. He only missed 4 games. I think he's right up there with Buddy Hield, and with the way MSU's finishing the season, I think it's gotten a lot closer than people maybe thought it had. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the thing to me is just that things other than scoring are probably a little bit underrated, right? So the fact that Denzel Valentine does so much, and MSU's athletic department right now is trying to show that by sending out those like Swiss Army tool things. I think
it's a bottle opener, a flashlight, and a knife. I don't know why they want a knife, but
yeah, I mean, I guess you're showing a little bit of the MSU ag school hunter thing going on.
Or it's just MSU fans like to get drunk in the nighttime and stab people. So
it's a bold statement.
With that. You can do all 3 of those things with the thing. That's what it represents. I don't know.
So anyways, though, my point here is just about Denzel is that he does just so much on the court, and now Buddy Hield has a more diverse offensive game. He does a better job of getting to the line, but and he's an insane 3-point shooter. But at the same time, he doesn't do the things in terms of rebounding and creating for others that I think Denzel Valentine does. And just the fact that Denzel is playing essentially point guard on this team, I think also, is a little bit playing out of position, and still performing the way that he has been has been especially impressive. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be offended if Buddy Hield won it, but yeah, Denzel absolutely deserves to be in the discussion at the very least.
And like I said, I think he's making his way in there, and if they continue to finish the season as they are, I think he will continue to make
right.
And
it's not like Oklahoma is running away with the Big 12 or anything, right? I mean, it's Oklahoma's been very good, but Kansas is probably gonna win the Big 12 for like the 12th time in a row, which is insane as well. But yes, it's not like you could say, well, Oklahoma's been a much better team, and so on a better team, the best player on the better team hasn't been injured or something like that, right? So it's a weird. I didn't expect to have this argument at all, right? So that's kind of it's been fun to see how Denzel has progressed throughout his career.
Yeah, Valentine's up to number 2 on the KenPom Player of the Year behind Buddy Hield, but it's pretty close. Buddy Hield's at 1.93, Valentine's at 1.87, and the next closest is Malcolm Brogdon from Virginia at 1.67. So it's pretty close there between those two guys. And maybe Valentine is there if he doesn't miss the 4 games, but I don't think the 4 games are a reason to move him out. It's 4 games. They played 30. They've already played like 30. So, yeah, and
we're gonna hit the Mark Titus stuff.
Yes, one last thing on Valentine is these awards are always, whether it's most valuable player, most outstanding player. I think Denzel Valentine is the most valuable player. I think MSU without him is not that great because they don't have any other point guards. I think Oklahoma without Buddy Hield is better than MSU without Valentine. But again, it's not really MVP. It's the player of the year. So the definitions kind of change. So okay, so the stupid Denzel Valentine thing. You go. I gotta drink some more water in my throat.
Sure.
You go.
So if you haven't heard about this yet and you're listening to The Only Color, I'd be surprised. But the idea, right, is that Tom Izzo faked the Denzel Valentine injury mid-season because he thought that MSU was peaking too early in the year, and then only to have Denzel Valentine return a little bit later so that they could make a run in the tournament, which is absolutely ridiculous on its face. But
he was being ridiculous too. That's the thing. He was having fun with it because he always talks about how he's like, just wait, once we get to every year, he's like, wait till we get to February and MSU's going to turn around. They do this every time, and then they do, and he doesn't. So the fact that they were where they were, he was having fun with it. So whatever, nobody cares. It's just a funny thing. And it became enough of a thing that people like talked about it. Whatever, just talked about it. And I believe a student writer for iSports Web just kind of wrote about it. I didn't really read the whole piece he wrote, but he just kind of mentioned it, and the fact that he just wrote about it, and the fact that someone had wrote about it all of a sudden seemed to legitimize the idea in some people's eyes, or the idea that he thought it was legitimate, which I don't think he did either, and no one did. And apparently it made its way to Izzo at some point because he brought it up during his press conference and called it ridiculous, and then had some fun with it when he talked to Mark Titus at Ohio State the other day. So I like it as a running joke. I think it's a funny joke, but I don't think anyone actually does take it seriously or ever thought there was anything to it, right?
Well, I would hope not, but people still don't understand that PFT Commenter is a parody account either. I think that people's reading comprehension on Twitter is not necessarily the best. I think in a weird way, to tie it back to the Player of the Year discussion, like the fact that Titus is even writing about Denzel Valentine is somewhat helpful, right? If you've got media people, MSU's athletic department sending out these multi-purpose tools, it helps to just have the coverage, right? So ultimately I think it's a positive thing for Denzel and for the team, and it's just kind of funny. I was curious about your take on the whole thing, but Izzo had I liked Izzo's reaction to it, saying that he hoped the guy who came up with that theory didn't get his degree from anywhere. So, and Titus is actually very good too. I enjoy reading Titus's stuff. He's pretty entertaining and pretty smart. So,
yeah, I mean, no one actually thinks there's anything to it. I think some Ohio State fans seem to think that MSU writers like legitimized it, but again, it was just like a student writer for iSports Web. It wasn't like the beat writers, asked Izzo about it or something. I don't know. It kind of turned into a weird thing. But no, of course it's not.
Yeah.
Of course it's not a thing, and nobody actually thinks it is. So, okay. So this has been another topic on Twitter the last couple of days, especially with the way Bryn Forbes has been playing. Is the best shooter in MSU history? Is he the best shooter or 3-point shooter, I think, in the Izzo era? So I decided to look up the numbers. On the season, Forbes is shooting 49.4%. I also looked up the records. That would be an MSU record by almost 2%. The record for, that's career. That's career. Hold on. What's the single season? Okay, that would not be the record. That would tie for fourth place, behind Kirk Mans in 88-89 hit 50.7%. In the same year, Todd Wolf hit 50%, but that was only on 52 attempts, so I'm not going to count that. Scott Skiles, 25 for 50. I'm not going to count that. That's not many attempts. Kenny Kaminsky, 49.4%, 77 attempts. Again, not a high thing there. Forbes is already at 178 attempts. So that would, among high volume shooters, it would put him second all time for single season at MSU. Now, if you want to go by career, Forbes came into the year number 6th all time in his career at 42% because he'd only played 1 year, and that's what he hit. He's obviously adding to that this year, so he'll probably finish. I don't have career numbers. Actually, let me just add that up right now. He's already made so he made 164 last year, and he's taken 178 this year, so he's taken 342 in his career. Made 70, and he has made 88. So divide that by 342. It's at 46% for his career, which would put him second behind Kirk Mans' career of 47.5%. It would put Forbes just ahead of Sean Respert at 45.5%. And Respert's the one that everybody points to as the best shooter, maybe in MSU history. And for good reason. And I mean, we're younger. We don't remember a lot of these guys playing. But what's your take on this whole? But I will say, Rexroad, I believe I saw in tweet, was willing to put Forbes right up there. So where do you fall on this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't. I am bad with historical things like this because I got to MSU in 2008, and so that's sort of my historical reference. In terms of, and there's probably a couple different ways of thinking about this, right? In terms of pure 3-point shooting ability, he might be right there. It sounded like in the Respert days that he was doing a lot more creating, and that's probably why he probably shot a little bit worse as a percentage. So it's in some ways comparing apples and oranges. And so, yeah, I mean, if you put Respert in the Bryn Forbes role, would he shoot better than 49%?
I think
I don't know. That's a good question.
If you give him Denzel Valentine,
probably be right there.
If you give him Denzel Valentine as his point guard, I think so. I mean, a lot of these Forbes makes, a good amount of these Forbes shots are wide open. Part of that's because of great screens. Part of that's because Forbes getting open. Part of that's because Forbes and Valentine have played together forever and they know each other well. But I think if you put Respert in Forbes' position, I think Respert would be better shooting the ball. But
so Forbes, the other thing I'll say,
but single season, I mean, Forbes is right up there for the best single seasons in MSU history, and especially when you take into account just how many he's taking. But also, you know, again, 2 years. It's hard for me to say that because he didn't do it over 4 years like a guy like Resper did over a career. And I think it's a little bit different when you're saying shooter, you're comparing numbers, percentage numbers, as you would say Magic Johnson being the best player in MSU history, even though he played 2 years. But it's Magic Johnson. Like, you don't need numbers for that. So that's. But when you're looking at numbers and stuff like that, I think we do need to take into account if Forbes had played 4 years at MSU, his career 3-point numbers would be, I think, quite a bit lower.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other interesting thing is that Forbes himself kind of overshadows to some degree just how many excellent 3-point shooters there are on this team overall. I mean, you got Aaron Harris shooting 42%. You got Matt McQuaid shooting 40%. Even Alvin Ellis has been shooting 39% this season, which is...
Imagine if Kenny Kaminsky was still on the team. That guy was...
Oh, my God. That would have been... You know what's interesting, too, is that Kenny Kaminsky would have been a useful player on this team because he's sort of the right style of power forward that MSU is sort of lacking. So that's it's a little disappointing that he's not on this team. But it did sound there was a story about him recently. I forget where it was written, but it did sound like he was doing a lot better.
Well, that's good. If he's getting his life back together, that's good. MSU is the number one 3-point shooting team in the country, 43.2% on the year. In conference play, that's 46%. And John Gasaway noted earlier today, no major conference team has ever shot this well from 3-point range in the last 10 years. I think the next closest was 2011 Ohio State at 45%. So what MSU's been shooting from 3-point range in Big Ten play has not been seen in the major conferences for quite a while. So, and there, I mean, like I said, with the 3 games left, there's a decent chance that they could hold on to that. But yeah, number one 3-point shooting team in the country, and again, a lot of these are wide open, and they're only, I mean. They're 181st in 3-point rate, as opposed to 3-pointers compared to total shots taken. But they're number one in the country in assist rate. 71.5% of their buckets are assisted on, and that's why they get so many open looks from 3.
So the flip side to that, though, is that if Costello gets in foul trouble, then the offensive diversity suffers pretty significantly. It seemed to me like after Costello came out in the first half against Ohio State, that they went to Denzel Valentine in the post, actually, a couple of different times. And, you saw him get called for a travel that maybe wasn't a travel, but the fact that he has such a size advantage over the point guards or other guards that might be guarding him might end up making him a useful post presence, posting up guards that probably don't have a lot of experience in the post defense.
Kind of like that Chauncey Billups. Kind of like that Chauncey Billups style that he used to play for the Pistons when he was bigger than the guys he was up against, like Tony Parker. He'd post them up.
Right.
Yeah, because like I said, without Costello, there's not a lot of options for inside scoring.
And just not a whole lot of offensive diversity in general, right? I mean, they're going to run a lot of pick and rolls. They're going to run a lot of guys, whether that's Forbes or Aaron Harris off of, or even Matt McQuaid off of screens to try to get them open. And they're going to kind of dump the ball down to Costello or Davis. So that is one area of concern, is that this offense is absurdly efficient right now, but it isn't hard to envision a game kind of going poorly and the offense struggling pretty significantly. Well,
I think Forbes is shooting in their losses. I think Forbes is shooting like 14% from 3 or something like that. So I mean, they've sort of gone a little bit as his shooting has gone, or when it's not there. I mean, you think about the Purdue game and what Rafael Davis did to him. Really limited that MSU offense for a while. There, especially when the big men were in foul trouble. So if they come across a team like if they come across a team like that in the NCAA tournament who can with a guy who can lock down Forbes or something, And if Costello's in trouble, they're going to have to figure out some other ways to score.
Yeah, and I think that they can do that. It's not a total death knell, but so against Indiana, right? At home, they won by 19. Forbes only went 1 for 4 from 3. Against Florida, he went 1 for 7. So it's not, absolutely killer, but it certainly hampers things. But it seems too like Forbes has gotten better over the course of the year at running, using screens and getting open on plays like that. And I think part of it too is just having Denzel Valentine with the ball in his hands at all times, right? There's so much attention that needs to be paid to Valentine in the way that he opens up things for guys in the pick and roll, or even shooting himself. That's really opened up Forbes quite a bit. So we've been saying it since the end of last season, maybe mid-year last year, that the more involved that Bryn Forbes is in the offense, the better that is. And I think that will continue to be true.
Yep. And, defensively, this team, we've talked about before, they're number 22nd in adjusted defensive efficiency, but they're number 5 in both 3-point defense and 2-point defense. Number 2 in effective field goal percentage even. So, and they don't foul as much as we thought. 33.9% is the opponent's foul rate, and that's actually 6% lower than last year. So I mean, they don't force turnovers, and then opponents are hitting 72% of their free throws, which has just sort of been bad luck, but it also depends on the guys you're fouling. But I mean, this defense, like I said last week, I think has been better, a little bit better than it's been given credit for.
Yeah, and I mean I think they do a fantastic job of just extending possessions. I think they do a very good job on hedging in the pick and roll as well. I've noticed that from the bigs quite a bit. I mean, Izzo does just a terrific job of coaching that up. I remember when Derek Nix was doing that, given the size of Nix, like if you can coach Derek Nix to hedge well on a pick and roll, like you're going to have some success coaching defense probably, right? So I think it's a good sign. It seemed too like there were a couple times against Ohio State, and I don't know, we'll be very interested to see if this continues against the next 3 Big Ten opponents, but there are a couple times where Valentine and Aaron Harris both were a little bit more aggressive in jumping passing lanes than they had been. And so I think that Izzo is aware of that deficiency on defense in terms of turnover percentage, and I think that they're working on it, at least anecdotally. And so I guess we'll see if that happens a little bit more. I think that not having Tum Tum probably hurt to some degree. He doesn't have great steal numbers himself, but he just has sort of the athleticism to get his hands on.
He played a couple minutes last night, and he played very well on defense in the time he was in there. I did notice him especially on defense when he was out there, and I think he did get a steal thanks to some of those quick hands. But they didn't really use him running the point though at all much. He's still working his way back, but I think he did provide a little bit defensively for them when he got in there.
Yeah, and I was a little concerned about the amount of time that Denzel Valentine spent in the game.
And I think Izzo mentioned that too. I think Izzo seemed to take some blame for wearing him out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad that that's the case, because he, in these blowout games, he shouldn't be playing 38 minutes. He could have gotten a little bit more rest. But
I think we're going to see that in the next 2, maybe 3. So yeah, they play Penn State on Sunday, Rutgers on Wednesday. I don't know what day we'll record the next podcast, but let's just predict the next 2 games. Do you think they will beat Penn State and Rutgers?
I mean, Rutgers is pretty good, so it's
they lost by what did they lose by to Minnesota? They lost by 22 to Minnesota, who's 293 in KenPom. Rutgers, it's 302. They are Yeah,
Rutgers hasn't won in 2 months. They haven't won a game since December 28th. Like,
their last
ugh.
Big Ten win was when they took down Wisconsin, which is crazy
Yeah,
to
that
think about
Kaminsky
now.
was,
So
man.
yeah, they're gonna go winless in conference play, and they may break. I think Northwestern in the late '90s has the record for Big Ten losing streak or something like that. I think Rutgers may get there. So I don't remember what the numbers were, but yeah, they're
Yeah.
good. So yeah, I mean, I can't imagine MSU has any trouble with either of the next two games. If they do,
And
then
Rutgers,
If they do, we'll have something to talk about. But
I do want to mention a couple things about Rutgers just because they're so bad that it's pretty entertaining. So the first thing is that they're worse than 300th in the country in KenPom, which like the average
that's unheard of for a major conference team.
right. I mean, basically by themselves, they are dragging the Big Ten's average ranking way, way down. Number one. Number two is that there's a real chance, I think, at this point, that Rutgers ends up being an RPI anchor for most of the Big Ten. I mean, I think that the Big Ten at large will have a worse RPI than they would otherwise because Rutgers is in the league. So it's just mind-boggling that you could have a team in a region that is pretty talent-rich be just so horrible, and it's just sad. Like MSU's favored, so KenPom favors MSU to beat Rutgers by 22 points at Rutgers. Like that's just completely ridiculous. But you gotta get that TV money, right?
From what I've seen, it has paid off. I believe the big BTN revenues are going up, and the reason they did the move was money, and from that perspective, it seems to be working, and it also doesn't hurt football recruiting efforts in New Jersey either. So I think teams are willing to put up with Rutgers being terrible for some of the benefits they get. So I mean, that's what it was for, and that's what we're getting. So anything else you wanted to touch on?
Nope, I got my Rutgers rant out of the way. So
Yeah, well, as much as you can muster to rant on a very bad team. So,
yeah.
I can't believe we didn't start off with the biggest news either, which was Shane McMahon returning to Monday Night Raw on Monday at the Joe. I regretted not going. I was so close to going, but I was sick, and I was like, I didn't go. And
Hashtag excuses, Chris.
And I missed Shane McMahon's return, and I was kicking myself over that. But WrestleMania is coming up, so they're trying to make it interesting. So we'll see. I'm actually going to be doing a WrestleMania podcast with the guys at Black Shoe Diaries, the Penn State blog. When it gets cool. I did it with them last year, and we talked for like 2 hours. So I don't even know if anyone listened, but it was just fun talking. So probably do that again at some point coming up soon. But all right. So yep, MSU versus Penn State and Rutgers over the next week. If they lose, we'll have some big stuff to talk about. But assuming they don't, we may send out some asked for some questions to answer. Maybe try to have some fun with the next podcast because not much to talk about when your team's when the team you're talking about is really good and they're not playing anybody. So we'll keep an eye out on Twitter for that. At the Only Colors and at Chris Vanini and at JOBIN #2 E. So for Joe, this is Chris. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope the audio was good this time. If it's not, I will see what we can do about fixing that. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, and I appreciate you guys listening, and see you.
See ya.